I think it's weird, like building music and building businesses, they're not that different. You know, they both start with nothing. They both require belief in what you do before the evidence happens. They both demand resilience before anybody's clapping for you or rooting you on. I used to think that the creative side was separate to the executive side, but I've learned that it's actually at the source of it.
Justin, welcome to the One Away Show.
Thanks for having me, Brian. It's good to see you.
It's great to see you. So Justin, I have loved getting to know you over the last year, maybe. So I'm stoked to finally have a platform to record one of our great conversations and share about you. So Justin, what is the one away moment that you want to share with us today?
You know, you prompted me right before we jumped on here, and there's a lot of pivotal moments that kind of had an inflection point, but I'm going to go way back on one. When I was a kid, man, I hated school. I hated doing traditional school. I'll put it that way. The cookie cutter box that was being baked just wasn't for me. And I knew it at a young age that I just was into different stuff than what I was being taught. And when I was a junior in high school, I studied production and media. And that to me was an inflection point that was really pivotal because I had supportive parents and I did a half day school, kind of getting college level credit, learning about design and technology. And it blew my brain open in a way that really let me know that like my instincts with the traditional stuff, that it wasn't quite for me, but there was like a whole world out there as kind of a creative explorer that totally illuminated my imagination in ways that was like really starving for it. And when I found that, it really kind of created a path that I followed. To this day, there's one other piece that I'll reference that was a really big moment for me along that same line. I remember my first year in that school, the teacher, this amazing teacher named Laurie, she organized a field trip at a design studio nearby. And I'm doing this call from a small town just south of Burlington in Vermont. I grew up in Burlington, Vermont. Lived in the Bay for a really long time before coming back. But this design studio was in Burlington, and it was called Jagger Apollo and Kemp. It was JDK for short. And I remember going on this field trip, kind of feeling like all adults were lame, and like most of the jobs that I'd been, pervy to, like just the environments were like very not creative and kind of were boring to me. And I remember walking in this design studio and just being like floored because there was a vibe. They were like playing like Tribe Called Quest, and they were doing marketing, and they were doing brand strategy for Burton Snowboards, which they're also based out of Vermont. And it was like these cool kids in like their 20s and young 30s that were like really on the bleeding edge of culture and snowboarding. And there was a half pipe in their basement, and people were like tattooed, and there was like cool vibes. It was like an open floor plan, which at the time was like unheard of. Like most offices were like cubicles and shit. And I remember walking out of that field trip being like, dude, like one day I want to have an office. Like I want to have a company like this. And it was that moment that kind of cemented this idea for a career path that was really focused on professional design and creative technology. And that was an inflection point that led me down this road that was totally switchbacks up the mountain. It was not a straight line to be where I am today, but it's brought me to a lot of really cool places, and I've learned a ton of really cool stuff along the way.
Dude, what I heard in both of those example stories, threads of Justin, was just to drive towards the unconventional. Like you resonated with the open floor plan and like the vibe of this, company that was doing things in a newer way. You had a distaste for the traditional of school. You and me both. What So, sometimes, well, I want to go back to the school moment to start. Uh, you are how old again when this started to happen?
When I started to realize that I wasn't into traditional school, boy, first grade, second grade,
Okay. Wow.
like legitimately. I remember like I would always finish my work really, really quick. And I'm like, dude, what the hell is everybody doing? I would just get up and walk around and I would draw. And I was just like, dude, this is so lame. Like there's so many other cooler things to be doing right now.
Totally. Yeah, yeah. I always thought the same thing, but I could never finish it quick because I never felt like I was that smart in the classroom. So, but anyways, this is about you. I resonate with everything you said. Just why are we doing this? So sometimes though, when you're a kid and you maybe have different interests or your taste is in different areas, and that's not always celebrated. That is pushed aside. That is, hey, Justin, this is the path. But for you, the impression that I've gotten from you is you haven't really deviated from the unconventional. So my question for you, and maybe I'm wrong, is when you started to have these realizations and it became clear to you, how was that translated at home? How was that championed? How was that not championed?
Yeah. Um, I have really supportive parents. I grew up where my parents divorced when I was really young. So I had two different houses and kind of two different styles of parents. They were both very supportive in their own
How
ways.
old, by the way? I'm just curious.
Second grade.
So right around this kind of fracture in the school system.
Yeah. 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 I I had an unconventional teacher in my mom because she has always done business entrepreneurially. So at a very young age, I had a realization that in order to cover your bills, like you didn't have to go work for somebody else. So that was an insight that I had at a young age. And she was quite supportive of me doing something untraditional because she kind of celebrated some unconventional uh, systems herself. And my father, I feel like he did play the game a little bit more straight and narrow, but he also deviated from traditional paths. So at the end of the day, like both parents were really supportive and they also knew at a really young age the stuff that I was leaning into with like art and music. Like I got my first set of turntables when I was like 13 and I was leaning into just like creativity and illustration and photography. And I was like really excited to learn about like video production and graphic design. And like they saw all of those as like viable paths. Like my dad loved music, and despite the fact that I wasn't classically trained like he was, he still saw the path that connected like DJing and the love of music and that culture to like a creative path that could be professional in nature. So, I mean, long story short, I feel like it was celebrated by my parents. And the other really cool thing about that vocational school that I was referencing, I had a couple really close friends that were a year older than me that did a similar path. And like their parents were kind of friends with my parents. So I had advocates as to like, yeah, this is a pretty good system for, fill in the blank name that was doing it ahead of me, which I think really helped because um, these type of schools are like probably a little bit more celebrated and recognized today than they were back then. But my parents knew that the traditional thing was not for me. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
I don't know if that answers the question well, but
No, I mean, I think you hear a lot of people who they completely go against the grain because of like they didn't feel the support at home, and so they like not only screw the system but like screw the foundation. But I think it's you saw the system pretty early, and you had two parents that were supportive of your path or pathways from multiple viable directions, just given their own journeys.
yeah. And this is like a interesting thread that I still get just as excited about today as when I was in that first or second grade mindset that I was referencing. The thing that drew me into that world in high school and the thing that pulled me into it when I was a kid, which is still the very thing that excites me to this day, is I've always been obsessed to, and I use the word, I don't use it lightly, like legitimately obsessed with creating something that didn't exist before I had that moment to sit down and the inspiration to do it. And when I was a kid, it was in piles of markers and reams of paper, and the medium changed over time, right? Today, that output is in products, companies, music, you name it, but it still draws from this thread of creating something that didn't exist when I put my ass in the seat and I was inspired to draw from something, with some thrust to create something.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one, let's dive into that. And I just, last thing I'll say about the parent side is like, I think that's pretty rare.
Yeah, me too.
To have one parent is one thing. I think that both is another.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's really special. You have kids, you can get into it, but to have that, it's amazing that you had both championing you.
There's just one more thing I'll say about that. Absolutely. Like, count my blessings on it. And it was by no means like a perfect childhood or anything, but I'll say something that was pretty cool as I think back. I referenced the path that my mom had taken entrepreneurially, kind of exposed us into, that world. She was really into putting on conferences and events that were focused around body, mind, and spirit. So at a very young age, we were exposed and thrusted into all sorts of far out stuff that to many people, they kind of refer to it, new age, woo woo or whatever. But we were like thrusted into the center of things about theology, philosophy, different meditation practices, spiritual modalities, like you name it. It was really like we were surrounded by so much of it. And what I kind of cultivated at a young age is this awareness, probably in part to like the world that we were thrown into, that like we have this universe inside of us. We got this one life to live, and we're really powerful beings, every single one of us. And I just kind of learned to trust my instincts and the things that I wanted to lean into with curiosity. And it's just led me on these really interesting paths with career and collaborative projects. But like that is a factor. And my sister and I are both like really, really blessed to have supportive parents that kind of exposed us to stuff that were super alternative.
Yeah. I mean, dude, it makes sense, man. I mean, I think you are alternative in like the best way. Like,
Thanks.
I don't see you as a guy who'd thrive in New York City and maybe parts of New York City, but in like the financier kind of world, like I just see like you're so like off the beaten path in a way that like I respect. And like, I think it speaks to like volumes about who you are. Like, I think it's, as I've gotten to know you, I'm like every layer I turn over, I'm like, this is interesting. And it's not mainstream. And I think that's really cool. So thanks for going down that parental pathway journey of how they champion you. That's cool. We were on the theme of creation and turning nothing into something. And he said, I don't take that lightly or say that lightly.
The obsessive part.
What is Justin's creative process to begin with, right? I mean, we know we haven't talked about things you've created to a degree yet, which we can get to. But like, when you see, like, how is your creativity birthed? Like, what happens, and how do you bring things to life? Like, give me like the process for you.
It kind of depends on what the output is. Creativity is fused into business stuff as well, right? Like, I actually find, as nerdy as it sounds, I love a good spreadsheet and, business forecasting and financing. Like, I absolutely love it. And I think that there's a lot of creativity that goes into like solutioning and forecasting business models. I legitimately do. but it uses a different part of my brain than if I'm sitting down to do something musically, for example. Um, I think that there's like so many different stages where my inspiration and my process has changed over the years, but I've come to realize that it all comes from the same place. It's just like I kind of get there have been moments where I've been really into painting as an example, or video or motion graphics and visual effects. Um, the essence of where I draw that inspiration from all comes from the same place. And I've like learned over the years, I used to think that these parts of me were very like different for different audiences. And we've even spoke about this before. Like I've oftentimes felt that maybe the business community won't understand the creative side of me quite the same way because I don't fit the mold of a traditional CEO with some of the things that I do outside of work. But I actually do draw from all of these outputs. I draw from the same place, and ultimately, it comes down to just like sitting down and doing the work. It's like what Seth Godin says. He's been writing his blog for however many days in a row, and it like some days he sits down, he doesn't know what he's going to write, but he makes sure that his butt is in the seat. And like if we're kind of antennas into the universe, so to speak, and we're able to pick up on frequencies, you have to be in a place where you can capture it. And sometimes it hits you when you're not expecting it, but you have to be prepared to capture it. And sometimes you're lucky enough to catch it like some lightning in a bottle and have it. Like for me, I feel like a vessel at times with some of the creative projects that I do. And it just kind of flows through me, but it all comes down to like just putting in the time and showing up to do the work. And you're dedicating time to do that. And there's a spiritual practice to it for me too.
You said that was great. You said if we are antennas, you have to be in a place to pick up the frequency.
Yeah.
And then you said at the end, there's a spiritual practice to it. So let's go a layer deeper. How does Justin pick up the frequency that drives these creative outputs?
For me, it oftentimes starts with a feeling, and it will be like, so I do things in a lot of different ways. I've come to realize like, the more life that you have lived and the more experiences that you have, the more that you can draw from and you can cultivate. And for me, making music and art is actually kind of a form of self-therapy in a lot of ways. It's me grappling with these challenging experiences or feelings and trying to make sense of it in a way, almost like a puzzle in a way. And it helps me unpack it and synthesize the many different things. And I output that. And for me, the way that I usually start it is if I'm wrestling with a feeling, whether it's excitement and joy or, challenge and sadness or whatever wave in between these two spectrums are, then I'll oftentimes start with instrumentals and composition. And I'll try to find, and I'll legitimately think about this as like visually as a form of frequencies and color. And I'm trying to sculpt a frequency that fits the feeling that I'm struggling to move through my body. And I'll create sequences that create a sound bed for me to then focus on these feelings. And I'm kind of creating an audio bed of frequencies, and then I'll use that as a means of working through all these different thoughts that I have around this particular feeling. And it's kind of like, it could be a feeling from the past, a feeling from the present that I'm recognizing around me or in me, or maybe something that I see in the future, kind of in these three different buckets in a way. And I'll kind of work it through trying to put together a puzzle, as weird as that sounds, and work through the feeling of it. And that's kind of the process that I go through when I create stuff. And another thing that I try to do, and this has been like more recently, like over the last couple of years, I heard a clip years ago from John Lennon talking about when he's lucky enough to catch a feeling that I'm describing to you in my own way, he never let himself leave the studio until he kind of completed it. And it doesn't need to mean that the song needs to be complete, but he needs to exercise the feeling, because if you're lucky enough to capture that magic in a way that's coming through you and organized in some way that you can, get it out there, because that feeling you can try to come back to, but you're never going to catch it the same way, like you're riding a wave, So, for me, I've worked really hard. Like, if I'm going to sit down and dedicate time, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to give myself time to see it through. So I'm not so I can work the problem that I'm trying to finesse through entirely.
Fantastic. But by the way, I think it's rare for a man to say, I let my feelings drive my creativity, and then I'm going to exercise the fullest of that emotion to create the most thoughtful output that can be shaped to a business, a song, a X, fill in the blank.
Mm.
And by the way, I viscerally resonate with what you're saying, but I think it's rare for a man to say, yeah, I in tune with my feelings and my body, and that's going to drive my creative expression, and it sounds woo.
Mm.
I believe that you don't hear people talk about that and creativity in that way. They start with, oh yeah, I saw a market problem and I'm going to apply creative functional business to this. And and I think what you're saying is energetically, I need to feel a gravitational pull and ride that pull to create output that I'm happy with, and then keep building on that and then keep riding that motion. So is that fair?
I would modify it a bit. With the business stuff,
Sure.
I'm much more practical, and I'm not I actually, to be totally frank, I try to cut my emotion off most of the time with the business things that I pursue and the decisions that I make, because I've learned that if I let my emotion lean too far into the business logic, then it's not as that I'm making business decisions based on emotional reactions as opposed to kind of practical. So actually I separate that really. I try to compartmentalize it pretty well. But the other thing I'll say, just I'm surrounded by women. I've my wife, I've got 2 daughters. I got 2 girl cats. It's my sister's got 2 girls. So it's not an uncommon thing for us to kind of talk about things this way. And also some of my best friends that are men that are super successful in life with business relationships and creative output, we kind of rap about stuff in this way. And there was an inflection point about 15 years ago. One of the most respected mentors that I have, who's wildly successful, he was a CEO of a very notable company. He kind of raps this way too. And I remember being thrown back a little bit because I kind of had a whole bunch of assumptions about him, and he broke the mold, and he made me realize that, you can be vulnerable in the way that you speak about things. Cause at the end of the day, we're all going through this weird experience. we can pretend like we know more, about the human experience, but I don't know, there's just a level of humility that I've kind of learned along the way from people that I admire deeply.
Yeah, and just to back up a little bit, I didn't mean for a second that you let emotion cloud how you make business decisions, but the feeling and the pull of what's inside, and when you capture it, how that drives creation within business.
Yeah.
And starting from that place,
For sure.
all right, is what I think is what you're saying is so interesting, and that leads to a level of vulnerability, whether you put that out there or not. It's vulnerable in that moment. So. Yeah, it's great. That's cool. I'm glad to know we're wrapping in the right direction. But okay, and then last question on this. I mean, we're going really deep on this alleyway, but what unlocks you to catch lightning in a bottle? What unlocks you to be able to listen and hear directionally what to do, what to create, how to go about bringing feature vision into present day reality?
I'm not sure. It's just always been an intuitive thing for me.
Okay. Yeah.
Being present is a really big part of it, I think, and trying to be open to the feelings that you might be having or the thoughts that you're grappling with, and being like honest about it. I think there's a lot of people that either live in the future or in the past, and I think it can be difficult. My assumption is that it can be difficult to find that lightning in a bottle if you're living in a place that's not the present, because the most magical stuff exists if you can kind of be there. That's where it shows up.
This has been a nice, deep way to understand and unpack how you see the world. So, what you told me on our last call was, hey, there's this part of me that I don't often lead with, tell people about, most people who know me don't know about. And I said, tell me more. And you said, I'm a musician. I create music. I produce. I do this, have this double life that I don't tell anyone about, but is like helps me so much. And so help us understand this life, if you don't mind pulling the curtain back, and maybe the origins of how this life began.
Yeah. I referenced earlier my first job. I saved up and got a pair of turntables. The two houses that I was brought up in, one was playing classical rock and blues and all sorts of music on that side, and then my mom's house, she was playing like Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul. So it was like this really eclectic mix of music. And as a kid, I got really inspired. I had older step siblings that lived in DC, and they would come up for the summer, and they would always have all the rap and all the hip hop tapes that I couldn't get in Vermont, like hundreds. And I just remember like leaning in with so much curiosity into the world that they were bringing from DC and loving it. And like I said, when I was old enough to start working, I saved up for turntables, and I really leaned into DJing, which I did for a really long time. I still have thousands of records and still have all the gear. But when I was in college, I went to Savannah College of Art and Design for visual effects and also audio. And I linked up with a really talented group of people, and I took student loan money and I bought myself studio equipment with one semester. I was just like, I need to be making beats instead of just playing other people's stuff. And I'd always been writing and messing around with freestyling and stuff, but I started to kind of take it seriously, not really knowing where it would lead. And ironically, I was really inspired by a number of artists at the time. This will come full circle. This one guy that I was really inspired by was this guy named Eli, because he was a super sick MC and he was a really talented producer. And I remember being like, wow, like there's people out there that can do both of these at like the highest level. I just remember being really inspired by the work that him and his peers were doing. At any rate, I graduated school. Another inflection point is right before I graduated. In fact, I had this interesting opportunity to work on a Super Bowl project. And I remember thinking I was going to graduate, go work in a visual effects studio in LA or New York. And this Super Bowl experience opened up my mind to a whole different avenue. And I remember one of the many things I was doing there, I did some work with Paul McCartney for a private Coca-Cola event. And you see like what goes into these massive productions, and it's super creative and super technical, and there was hundreds of people. Everybody was on comms, and felt like super professional. I remember being like, wow, this is a really interesting kind of bend between creative and technology in ways that I didn't even know existed. And I graduated college shortly thereafter. I moved out to the Bay Area with a handful of people I was making music with, and I ended up landing a job as a director of operations at a production company. After a couple months, I worked my way up into this role. And I remember thinking I was really fascinated by the business side of things, Brian. And I remember thinking to myself, I was going to go get an MBA so I could get a business degree and kind of understand a little bit more tactical nuances of the business side. I was just really curious, like profit margins and EBITDA and how to efficiently run businesses. And I ended up getting in touch with a recruiter that had found me for a role that was happening in Silicon Valley. And I found out about this job and I was like, oh my God, this would be like the exact type of job that I would assume that I would get if I were to go get my MBA. And I went through this long process of interviewing and ended up getting the job. And the funny thing about this, Brian, was the person that I was going up with at the very end of this long interview process, and it was like 3 months long, is my current CEO and co-founder of TAHO that I'm building with now. We were actually going head to head for this job, and I was hired and he was immediately brought on because he's a really bright guy. And, you know, I know that you asked about music here and how this unpacked, but throughout that entire process from moving out to the Bay and even working in some pretty amazing technology companies in the Valley, it was always in the background for me. The studio equipment, I continued to buy more of it. I continued to do late night studio sessions, tinkering down ideas, but it was always running in parallel to this career that I was cultivating in the heart of the Valley, working in the rooms with John Chambers and this, Paul Ottolini at Intel and some serious heavy hitters in the history of the Valley. I was a fly on the wall seeing these fantastic teams build out business models. And I was so intrigued by the business side, but as a means to like calibrate my center, I would go home and I would make music. And it never changed. It was always there. Because it was like escapism to some degree, but it also was like a calibration. It was like a recalibration, and it would charge my batteries in a way. So when I came back to work, I'd be fully charged. It's bizarre. Yeah.
Dude, so interesting. I mean, I think it's one thing. You went to SCAD.
Yeah.
I went to UGA. So, but this, I always was more intrigued actually by SCAD and like the Georgia Tech students for a reason here nor there, which we can talk about later. But
Athens is a fun city though.
Yeah, it is. There's a normalcy to Athens in a lot of ways though. But anyways, I was always pretty intrigued by the creative pool. So you had a very creative background. You said, let's go to the Bay. And then what I find really interesting is like at a younger age, it was like, what are the like puzzle pieces operationally that like actually make things work business wise, financially? And you had music and creativity going in the background to a degree, but you sort of maybe find the creativity between the spreadsheets, the numbers, the way things run systematically. What, up until that point, had you ever been like so operationally involved in things, or was it more create? Like, help me understand that.
The companies that my mom had as a kid, she kind of franchised them, and she did. It was always a small business, but I would come in and I would offer some support with some of the nuanced operational things. So I got a glimpse into things there. The company in the Valley that I went for that interview with that I just referenced, the owner of that company he did a solid and he took me under his wings and he kind of gave me a front row seat into the business side of things that he didn't necessarily have to, but he saw that I was expressing a lot of curiosity in the ways that things worked. And he really, at a young age, he just saw probably something in himself because he was around the same age when he made the jump to start that company. I can't quite say exactly what it was, but I know that he gave me visibility into the business when he didn't have to. And that continued to spark it for me. And after a few years of working with him, which was great, that's when I set out to do my own entrepreneurial thing. And I remember it happened, when you talk about a trajectory moment, there's actually one that's even more important, and that's the one I'm about to share.
Can you share who it was with context?
Yeah, I was working at this production outfit called AVT Productions, and they were doing a lot of interesting work with big companies in the Valley. And I had gotten a really severe hernia working, emergency hernia, from lifting something during a job that just like basically destroyed my body. And I went in and I had to have an emergency surgery, and I was bedridden for almost a month afterwards. It was crazy. It was like the first time in my life where I was physically unable to do something. And I was like, I was in this beautiful house up in the hills in San Jose. And on the outside, everything looked perfect as far as like a young kid, got a career path that looked solid. And I remember being miserable. And I remember feeling like I everything about this is like good on paper, but I got to figure out my own way. And I felt like there was something next for me. I didn't know what it was, but this injury that forced me to stop it forced perspective. And I was like in a bed for a month. And the day that I could get up and walk, I walked into walked into the founder of that company's office, and I gave him my resignation. I said, I just can't do it anymore. I got to do the next thing for myself. And I don't know what it is yet, but I have to trust in this belief that there's something next. And I remember convincing myself inside that I was going to break it to him 100 ways and he wasn't going to get it. And he immediately said, I totally get it. I totally get it. Like, I wish that you'd stay, but I really understand. And I remember this like enormous weight was off my shoulders because I really cared about him and I really cared about the team and everything that he'd poured into me and everything I'd poured into the company. It meant a lot, but I also recognized that the chapter was up, and that was the start of my entrepreneurial path. And that was about 16, 17 years ago or something. But it was weird because had I not have gotten injured, I probably would have kept, I don't know, but like it would have been difficult for me with the mindset that I was having at that moment. I was just go, go, go. And I didn't have the ability to stop and reflect in a way that a life-changing injury forced me to. And it was in that moment that it started a path, which ultimately led me to start my own business that I ultimately sold, a few years back. And then, yeah, so that operational journey, I learned a lot, and then I carried it in. And, when you're actually doing it yourself, you learn much, much quicker because you're forced to learn from your mistakes like really quick in different ways.
Yeah. And to build on that one, I think you hear a lot of things in the quiet that you'll never hear moving.
Yeah.
And two, I'm sure that founder who you looked up to, who you cared about, saw a ton in you and probably knew you were going to hit a point of discovery that was beyond his current ability to help you explore.
It's certainly possible. I think back so fondly on those years though, and I learned a lot. I was surrounded by really smart people, and he was a great mentor to me and others, so he probably, I would assume that he saw something in me that he saw in himself at a similar age, because he was around the same age when he started his own thing.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And it's neat that he handled it in that way, because I'm sure,
Oh my
you
gosh.
over the years, you've had people do that with you or will continue to do that with you. So it's what a way to show you the road.
Pay it forward, right? Yeah.
That's cool.
So one thing I referenced earlier, I told you I'd come back to. This is really amazing. So when I started when I took the student loan money, I was like, I'm going to buy myself some studio gear. And I was inspired by a handful of artists, one of them being this guy, Eli. Talk about a full circle moment. I'm releasing a project with him in early June. I produced his whole most recent solo record. He brought in a handful of amazing global musicians and artists that I've revered for my whole life, and was fortunate enough to produce his most recent project from front to back. And he's become like a dear friend over the course of the last couple of years. We've worked together, we've collaborated, we've been extremely vulnerable, talking about parenthood, business, relationships, like all of the things that it requires as you get older and the responsibilities that you take on. And the body of work that he produced that I created a sound bed for, really, I just gave him a safe space of music. But I've been following this guy's career for, 20 plus years, and I've listened to every project, and I can honestly say that this project that we're going to be releasing together is my favorite piece of work of his. And I love his work. And it has nothing to do with the fact that I produced it. It's just like the vulnerable, raw authenticity of who he is and all of the things that he struggles with as an artist, a perfectionist, a father, a husband, like just all the stuff. It's like come through in this body of work that's so cool. And it's like a real full circle moment for me. And I referenced his name earlier, and I wanted to come back around to it because in addition to building a company that we think is going to be absolutely game changing, with distributed compute and providing, the efficiency needed to support the innovation at scale that we're seeing every day, but we don't have the infrastructure yet to support it. Simultaneously, I've been working on projects like this with this guy. His name's Eli. And next week, we release the first single. In fact, it's a week today, from today, with Slug from Atmosphere is a feature on the track, who, again, I've been listening to his music for, 25 years. And it's just like one of those pinch me moments where it's like, dude, this life is just so bizarrely amazing and magical. And I wouldn't have imagined in 100 years that it would have kind of navigated in the way that it has. But it really just does come down to just putting your butt in the seat and just doing the work, because things show up in miraculous ways that you would never expect if you're willing to do the work.
Well, I think it's super cool that you get to produce an incredible project with someone you followed for 20 years or, seen all of his work. I think very cool. And you can kind of apply your own touches and tastes, and to know a body of work so deeply and be able to help shape a body of work in a way that speaks to you and him. How surreal. I want to get to TAHO. We will get to TAHO. I have one more question on this. How has this musical side of you, this following your instinct, the creative pursuit, the late nights that you haven't told many people about, like, how has that made you better as an operator?
I think that there's like been a discovery of this fine line between like being vulnerable and insecure. I've always enjoyed the idea of being strategic without coming across too calculated. I think that there's a story there which, I think I used to feel like it would confuse people, but it also has taught me like how to read a room, how to build a narrative, how to ship imperfect art or products and iterate. I think that that's something that translates to business really well. Not aiming for perfection, but just making progress. Learning how to command presence without raising my voice. How to turn pain into signal. That's certainly applied in the market.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's weird, like building music and building businesses, they're not that different. They both start with nothing. They both require belief in what you do before the evidence happens. They both demand resilience before anybody's clapping for you or rooting you on. And like, I used to think that the creative side was separate to the executive side, but I've learned that it's actually at the source of it. Yeah.
A few things: belief before evidence, ship imperfect art, read the room, strategic, but not too calculated. Pretty good. Yeah. And I think too, people like working with like people in a natural way, and no one likes the stuffy, super calculated. Like, you need that, and you can maybe not smell so much like that even if you have that muscle. But I think people want to feel like people. And so anyways, yeah, that's super cool.
Yeah, I think there's like, with the most special things I've ever been a part of, it doesn't always come down to like technical ability or talent. I think that oftentimes there's an alchemy involved with something that becomes special. And I've learned that the alchemy, it can come in a lot of different forms. And sometimes it's like the cultural, how things feel, and I try to, that's the part that like I get really intrigued about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, I'll say one thing on this. Like I've always been one to like follow a feeling and curiosity to my like work. And for 10 years, I've kind of been wandering intentionally. And I feel like for whatever reason this year, ironically, to 10-year mark, you know, it's like, it's all clicking or starting. And it's like, but have not, to that John Lennon quote you said, like, I've never wasted a good feeling. And
It's good.
so I resonate with your approach, and I think it's why we click so well. So now I want to transition to TAHO, because you are, I mean, if what you're doing takes, I mean, there's billions in outcome on the other side, and you probably calculated that, but it's probably not why you're doing it. But how did you spot, back to creativity, how did you spot this, see this, and be like, yeah, I'm the guy that can lead the charge in this? Like, and obviously tell us what it is more. I know you mentioned it earlier about efficient compute and where the world is, but like, how did you cross that bridge and say, oh, this makes sense?
Well, my previous company, we were a small team of misfits. I think we topped out at about 50 people. We were based in San Francisco. And people would hire us to do really bizarre stuff. So examples would be like creating really technical experiences for like the Grammys or World Economic Forum, or designing very sophisticated environments for large corporate campuses. We would do R&D for Fortune 50 companies. We would create unique software that and sell IP to companies. So we were designing things that were always bleeding edge. Most of the projects never had a blueprint. And in addition to, we were a full service company, so we would have design teams and strategy teams and full stack developers, and we would kind of see things through from ideation all the way to execution. But we would also build the infrastructure required to bring them to life. Now, some of that infrastructure would be one-off. We would design strictly for like, a 1 week, 2 week event, or even in some cases a weekend. And then others would live in perpetuity. So we would be designing systems for years before they ever saw the light of day. So we were building high performing computers that would just like rip, like that were benchmarked as some of the fastest computers on the planet. This was in San Francisco, working with really strong engineers, and we were building these systems because we were pushing the boundaries of what was conventional. We would design things that were like 20,000 pixels wide by like 8,000 pixels tall. So ultra, ultra, ultra high resolution media playback that would require so much compute in order to have this stuff play back properly. Like stuff that even today systems struggle with. And what we were seeing at that time, we sold in 21. So right before the big wave of AI started bulldozing through everything, right? But we were building systems that were supporting high performance compute. Now, when we sold that company, my co-founder, who I referenced earlier, Todd, him and I, we've always been good mates. We've stayed in touch, and we started doing accountability check-ins. He was an executive at Docker. He had led teams at Facebook and Snapchat building out their global infrastructure. And he was also working along our now chief technical officer, who was doing the same thing on the other side of the product. So the three of us had really unique perspectives around infrastructure and high performance computing. And we were seeing the writing on the wall with the lack of energy, the lack of data centers, the lack of chips, the inefficiencies that we were seeing way back when the workloads were 100 times smaller in workload density. And we were just seeing this really desperate need to solve computing much more efficiently than the stack that everybody's currently building on. And we thought that we could be the ones to develop that solution because we'd had insights along the way. And when we got together and we started talking about them, we had some really unique ideas. And that's ultimately how TAHO started, was talking about our learnings and the problem that we saw just like right in front of us that was going to be a massive problem, which of course it is. It's become much bigger of a problem over the last 24 months.
Yeah. You know, you did one thing super well from the start. Do you know what that is?
I don't.
You picked a name, even though it's not spelled the same, that is picturesque and beautiful, that when people hear it, they are like, tell me more. So
Yeah.
props to the naming. And then
Thank
two,
you.
dive for us who don't know you as well. And I talked to someone on your team recently, the investor salesperson. That was super random, by the way. We haven't even talked about it, but he described the problem very acutely.
Yeah.
Can you dive into the problem, like in an acute way, that over the last 24 months has blown up with AI, and like how you're solving the compute side of it from with infrastructure? It's like that is fascinating to me, and it only seems like it's only going to get bigger.
For sure. So the infrastructure that's powering AI today was designed for a world that no longer exists, period. Tools like Kubernetes, Slurm, they were built for scale when computing was a fraction of the cost and a fraction of the workload density. And when you think about compute with respect to like there's not enough energy, there's not enough data centers, there's not enough chips, this is all compounded on these problems that I'm beginning to kind of step into. So over the last few years, workload density, it's grown more than 100 times what it was just a few years ago, right? And these old legacies that queue and fragment and just overprice every single job that they run, this is what enterprises today are building upon. And it's creating enormous bottlenecks, and everybody's overpaying an insane amount, both fiscally and with the resources side, because we're at our wit's end. So TAHO is middleware that lives very deep in the technical stack, and everything that sits on top of it runs more efficiently. And the reason that we do this, or the reason that the efficiencies are embedded into the product, is we decompose workloads down to the thread layer. It's something that we call nanoservices. It goes beyond traditional microservices, so it really breaks things down at the assembly language, just zeros and ones, and it distributes that work across your entire fleet as over a unified fabric. So when I reference Kubernetes and Slurm, people oftentimes think about scheduling and orchestration. We use that as a comparison because that's what people use today, but we're creating a new mechanism for deploying workloads. So we're not a scheduler and we're not an orchestrator, although we natively do these things for jobs. We're fundamentally different in the execution. And the interesting thing is the way that we disperse jobs, we can allow customers to go down market with hardware to do jobs that are traditionally intended for really, really big jobs. And believe it or not, Brian, the data centers that everybody use, even when they're running at full capacity, they're actually only running at about 45 or 50% capacity because of all of the queuing and scheduling challenges that are really deeply embedded into the machines. So we're removing that overhead with TAHO. And I love the fact that you appreciate the name, by the way, because it was really intended. Like, we do see a challenge with our environment. Now, we're not, an environmental company per se, right? But like, there's an interesting dichotomy there, which is we only have one planet, and we don't have infinite resources in energy or water or many of the things that are required to do the computing that we have today. So we have to be really efficient with what we have.
Yeah.
And Lake Tahoe is one of the most beautiful places in the world. It's got, I think it actually might be the cleanest water, if I'm not mistaken. So it's like the cleanest lake. So the name was intentional in terms of, yeah, we're doing really deeply technical stuff, but we wanted it to be something that people would latch onto and have like a fond memory or recollection, easy for them to reflect on. But it's also associated to, savoring, the resources that we have, which is a really big topic today, like more so than ever, because we're really at max capacity.
Yeah. As you kind of talk about it in that sense, it makes total sense, right? It's like you're helping these companies use compute more efficiently. The guy says it's like if they buy in today's world, you spend $400 on compute. Well, with what your technology is doing, you can get it for like, you could argue you're getting it for 20 or 30 because of how efficient you're making things. And
that's right.
Like unbelievable technology. And we don't have too much time to go into the product of this.
We have 3 pillars that we build to, and all of our decisions that we make through the company go through it. It's got to be faster, more affordable, and it's got to be universally adaptable into customer environments. And we think that if we pull those 3 off, these help to anchor the decisions that we're making as we develop and mature the product. And everything is fundamentally tied to those 3 principles.
Dude, I love it. I think it's as much as I would love to go longer and over and spend another hour with you. I love the pillars of decision making. It's special, and I'm excited to see you pull it off, man. Because I think if you can, it's the world can be a better place for it. Innovation probably can happen faster because of it. Right. I think it can speak to a lot of your core values. So, Justin, where can people find you, your music, your company, and take us home?
I'll give you 3 places. You can follow our company, TAHO, at www.taho, which is spelled TAHO.is. So that's website number 1. You check out anything surrounding me and anything that I'm working on at my first and last name, justingelinas.com. It's justingelinas.com. That's a website that's got a bunch of things I'm working on. It also has a kicker over to my music, but I'll give you that music website as well, which is phase1music.com. FAZEONE music.com. So you can check out any of those 3 things, and I'm constantly keeping them updated.
Awesome. I'm excited to let this rip, dude. This has been a joy, a pleasure. I look forward to more.
Thank you for having me along for the ride, Brian. Appreciate you, man.
Yeah.